Once again, this is Nick Westerman. I'm an accessible technology instructor with the Society for the Blind. This is our regular life seminars. Our life seminars is an acronym. Life stands for Live Independent, Free, and Empowered. In these seminars, we cover a variety of topics that interest us as blind people, whether it be educational, dealing or coping with blindness, or entertainment purposes or technology purposes. We try to cover a wide gamut of different things, and we all share in hosting these. All of us instructors share in hosting these at different times. And today happens to be my turn. And my turn came about kind of an interesting story. I was trying to think of what to do for this particular seminar, and inspired by something that my coworkers Brandy and Randy had put together with a person who has done the audio descriptive things for TV. I thought it would be great if we could get a narrator, a voice actor, a narrator, a reader of books who does the voice recordings that we all listen to so much. So I'm a big Audible user, National Library Service Bard user, and Hoopla user all on my phone on apps. I also use some of them on the Victor reader, and I listen to a lot of books. So I wanted to try and get a narrator on here. In that, I'm active on social media, and I have a Facebook page that I go to often. It's called Lit RPG, and it's a bunch of people for a specific genre of books that all like those books, and a lot of the authors also participate on the page. And I've made a lot of contacts that way. And so I put a question out there before Christmas asking if there was any narrators who would be interested in jumping on to do this. And within a very short period of time, Mr. Daniel Wisniewski, who's here with us today, jumped on the messenger with me and messaged me that he would be interested in doing this. And we chatted about it. He sounded very excited about it. So I was very excited to get him to sign up for doing this with us. And at the time, the name didn't immediately ring a bell, but I went in to look up all the books that he'd done just to get an idea of how many books he's done. And there was a lot of them on there, and I realized I'd listened to a couple, and then I realized that I was actually currently at that moment in time listening to a book that he was narrating. So you talk about ironic events there. I was actually listening to his voice narrating a book while I was talking with him on Messenger. So, so yes, we're very excited to have Daniel with us today. He's going to give us a little overview of what he does as a narrator, how the process works, and then we're going to have some time to, ask questions and stuff like that. So again, this is Daniel Wisniewski, and he is a narrator. You can find on Audible. He's got a lot of books on there. Daniel, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Okay, thank you, sir. And again, thank you for having me back again today. It's really fun to be able to talk to people who are interested about what I do. So, as you can tell, I'm a lot more calm than I was yesterday. I've cut back on the coffee. So I started doing audiobooks October of 2019. I had been a theater actor before that. I had studied theater my whole life, but I always wanted to be a voice actor, growing up watching cartoons, all that jazz. And I found a job at a company, a startup, that would train me in how to edit audiobooks, produce audiobooks. And they gave me a massive amount of work to start out with, pretty much like a book a week. And that was part-time, in addition to also still auditioning for theater and having another part-time job. And then the pandemic hit, and I lost pretty much everything in that regard. Like all the part-time jobs closed down, obviously. The theater job that I actually had booked a couple of days before postponed, and it's still in postponement. So the only thing left that was still consistent and present was audio work. So I turned a part-time job into a full-time job. I auditioned like mad. I was fortunate enough to work with some great partners and some fantastic authors and companies. And it's now a full-time job. And actually just today, I found out that my 100th audiobook has officially been released on Audible.
That's cool.
Sorry, my mute button got stuck. what was that that was just released today, Dan? You don't mind sharing?
Sure. It's actually a lit RPG through Mountaindale Press. It's called Invasion. It's the second book in the Viceroy's Pride series. And it's very fun science fantasy. And I know that it's kind of a weird genre mix, but it very much is science fiction. But if the aliens were elves and they had their own sort of ways of propulsion with their ships using mana and magical armor and things, and how what would happen if a fantasy army invaded Earth. It's so cool. And that is something I'm very proud of that I was able to work on. And I'm so happy that it finally came out. It was postponed for a bit, but it's coming out now. It's going strong, and it's one of my favorite series I've had the pleasure to work on. So I'm happy that's my 100th.
Excellent. So now I've noticed also. I was we're talking about this when I was bringing up the fact that we had done this on the online thing, that lit RPG. Like you said, that was the genre that I found you on and I posted this on. And for those who don't know, it's called literary role playing games. What RPG stands for. So it's basically kind of a fantasy fiction thing that has the game elements to it. So it's kind of a fun genre, but not necessarily everybody's cup of tea, but it's something I enjoy listening to. And actually, one of the authors that I had that I've listened to on there was one of the people that, right when I put up the post, had recommended Daniel to be person, and that was Dave Wilmark, who has very generously also donated a free audiobook code for one of his books that you narrated. I believe that was Battleborn, the first Battleborn
Yes.
book, right?
Yes, that was actually, I'd say, the book that got my start into full-time. I found that book for auditioning on ACX, which is the narrators audition website. And it was rare because those kinds of books, because he's a big fantasy author in the genre, he's massive. And to see that on a public audition space through Mountaindale Press, who are also very selective in who they want to work with, and rightfully so, because they do a lot of great work and work with a lot of great people, to be able to have a chance to audition for that, once I saw it go up, I called my friend Jessica Threet, who is also a fantastic narrator in her own right. I said, we need to get on this. We need to audition for this as a partner thing. You take the female voices, I'll take the male voices. She said, gung ho, let's do it. Audition for it. Within the day, it went down and we got offered the job. So it was very lucky. And it's one of the, I think probably in the top 5 books I've read doing this job. And Dave is just a wonderfully chaotic guy. And I love talking to him, and he's such a nerd, and he loves what he writes, and we love what he writes. And it really comes across in the writing, how passionate he is about the gaming aspect of lit RPG. But from that, I was able to find more projects like it. Other authors were like, hey, this sounds great. So that was a really big project for me, probably the biggest I've done.
And you mentioned in that, and I asked about the Justice, I'll bring it up again, that you worked with Jessica Threet in that, and you have worked with other actors and actresses in doing performances, which I find is something that might be a new trend in the audiobook industry. Not something I've seen an enormous amount of in the past, but I've been seeing it a little bit more and more lately. And then we kind of talked about how that is and how you guys work together. Are you in the same room? Do you guys have to, be on a meeting together to record together and that kind of stuff? Tell us about that experience.
Sure. Yes, I've been very fortunate to work with some fantastic, mainly female partners. Rebecca Woods, Jessica Threet, Marissa Parnes, and Amber Lee Connors, who, if you know anime, she's big in that too. I'm a big fan of hers from anime, so that was awesome. But how it usually works, nowadays, because of the pandemic, we're all in different spaces now. So for these partner books, we typically are in separate rooms. I record the primary narration more often than not. Sometimes it's not the case, but mostly I record the primary narration, and the female partner that I work with will record the secondary narration, which is usually all of the female lines or any sort of quasi-female character in lit RPG. She'll maybe read the stats to give her more lines in the book. And then we splice them together in the editing process, which takes a bit, but we've kind of all gotten to the point where we can kind of tell what style we're going for with the line reads. We worked with each other in person for months before, so we now kind of remember each other's delivery styles, things like that. And it's crazy that we're able to do that, but it's gotten to the point where it sounds like we're still in the same room.
Excellent. So I thought of this question, and you bring up like the women's voice now, but that's great when you've got somebody there doing that stuff. But in a lot of your books, you also have to narrate the entire thing. So you have to do the full gamut of narrating both the male and female voices, and all the different accents and everything like that you may want to portray in that too. So what do you find to be probably more difficult or more vexing, to do the female voices, or to do some of the stranger accents that you might be asked to come up with?
Yes, I'd say female voices present their own challenges, because there are many voice books that I do all the voices for solo narration, and female voices are always it's difficult. I'd say more so because I could convincingly pass as, British or Scottish or even Spanish in audio work, but there is no way that this voice is going to sound like a lady unless it's a very testosterone fueled lady. So there is a little bit of an element of, suspension of disbelief, but at least getting across the idea of it. I remember I watched an interview, I believe it was with Scott Brick, who is, a god in this job. I have Jurassic Park. It's one of my favorites. And he mentioned that it's more of just the idea of it, to give an inkling, this sort of like, a more breathy tone, something that gives the suggestion. That's the word I was looking for, the suggestion of a female voice, because listeners know, and they're aware of it, as long as the effort is put forward to at least sound different, then listeners are typically more forgiving and will go along with it. But for accents, I love accents. I actually work as on the side, I have worked as a dialect coach, and I've worked on different shows where I've had to work with people's accents and maybe lose some of their accent, bring out more of the characters' accents. So accents come actually very easy to me. It's pretending to be a lady that is a little bit more difficult.
Well, what about now? We talked about this a little bit yesterday. So what about when you have to pretend to be something that's not even a person? You got to be some sort of a machine or a sound effect or
that's
an animal.
That is some of my favorite stuff to do, sir. That is some of the most fun I have in the booth, is being dragons, trolls, disembodied spirits. There's one book in particular that also it was around the same time I did Battleborn. And honestly, this book, actually, I'd say that while Battleborn got me more projects, this book made me good. Like, this was the book where I thought, okay, now I'm good at this. It's called Soul Stealer. It's by Shane Boulware. It's solo narration. And in that, I play the main character, who then gets possessed by this demonic, venom-like entity who has a very monstrous sounding voice. And I worked on that for like a month in post-production too, to create the effect for the audiobook. But also, I had to do that voice myself. So it was a mixture of post-production fixing, but also that performance of getting into that sort of demonic, otherworldly sound. It was so much fun. I drank a lot of tea because it was hard on the chords, but it was so much fun to just become something that I really am not. And that applies to all monsters in general. It's just so much fun.
So we've talked a lot about the fantasy thing, but we talked about this a little bit yesterday. You also have done other types of genres and different types of books other than that.
Yes, sir. Yes, I've also done science fiction, military science fiction, dramatic science fiction. A lot of the works by Chris Kennedy in his Four Horsemen's universe, which is very fun, a different change of pace, but still a very driven style of storytelling. And I've also recently produced a book with Christopher Hopper, and that was a partner narration with my partner, Rebecca. It was some of the most interesting writing I have seen because it was such a grounded science fiction. It takes place, I think, like 100, 200 years in the future. And it's one of the things I like about science fiction versus fantasy. Fantasy is all about what things might be, the possibilities of anything could be possible. But science fiction, to me, when it's grounded in more of a reality of more of this is what things could be theoretically, that to me just gets those creative juices flowing and makes me excited about, oh yeah, this could potentially be the future. This could be what we're dealing with. It could be like a bit of a predictive story here. So that sort of stuff really attracts me about that genre. And that's sort of become my second genre. And aside from that, I do a lot of romance fantasy as well, which I actually talked about last night with R.C. Bray and Tess Irondale on R.C. Bray's podcast, and Rebecca. She was on it with me. She's my main partner for romance fantasy. So we talked about that genre a lot as well. So that was fun. It's coming out Valentine's Day weekend if you like podcasts.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I know that a lot of people, Brandy and I were talking about him yesterday also after we finished. So yeah, there's a lot of great narrators out there. And I guess before I go into that, I wanted to revisit when you did mention yesterday that you were pretty much now working from home. You have kind of created your own studio, and you pretty much work from your own studio at home and do a lot of the work of producing it yourself in that sense. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I was very lucky in the sense of moving to a brand new apartment that allowed the space to have a studio. Before, I was recording in my bedroom under a sound dampening blanket with a janky little mic stand, a good mic, but a janky mic stand attached to my radiator, and reading off of a very tiny tablet screen, and having to turn on the air conditioner to create a sort of sound dampening that I can use in noise reduction. You can hear it if you listen to my stuff. You can hear the last book in that space and the first book in the new space because it's such a difference in like noise reduction quality. It's still good, but like it's a noticeable like, oh, the whoosh is gone. But yes, I have a new space in my apartment here in New York. I have sound dampening blankets on the walls where they should be. I have proper spacing. Now I'm not cramped underneath a blanket. I can stand. It's so nice to stand. And then I usually will spend the majority of the day recording, have some lunch or something, a snack, then go into editing. My fiance has also been very, very supportive and helpful in regards to my editing. She'll help me clean a lot of those files as well. And then I send it along to the publisher. I can usually get out about a book a week.
And most of the books, like when we're talking about them, I would say, just from my personal experience and watching them, most books are finished products between 11 to 14 hours, some longer, some shorter. Some are very, very long. Do you have a preference? Is there? I mean, is there a point? I mean, if you were doing Brandon Sanderson's like Stormlight
Chronicles, gosh, I'd want to work with somebody. At least one partner, maybe two. Split up that workload. Typically, it really does depend. I find that the best books I've worked on, quality wise, have been at least 12 hours, roughly, of finished audio, which, as we discussed yesterday, typically you want to average about double the time for production and recording and mastering and everything like that. So maybe double or 2.5 times the amount of time will be the finished product is the time you expect to put in. So I hesitate to say that I want to work on longer, but then again, I am working on a very long first book by TJ Reynolds called First Fist, which will be out within the next month and a half, and it's some of the best writing he's done, and it just allows the author more time to be creative in their descriptions. The longer a book is, the more, I don't know, freedom that they have, which allows me more opportunities to create a vivid, expansive narrative. Because I found that with books that are about 8 hours or stuff, it has the tendency, not necessarily it falls into this habit, but the tendency to be truncated, which doesn't give me as much to work with. So I'd say creatively, I prefer longer books, but proactively and as a businessman, I prefer 10 to 12.
Well, that's kind of what I was like. I would think that the longer you're into the book, I guess, in my opinion, the longer you're into the characters and stuff, the more the more feeling or grasp that you might get for the character that's been created in the book.
Yes, yes, it allows more time to really get into the character's head, I find, and it gives more time to really get an understanding of the character. Typically, when I start a project, now that I'm mostly, I am full time, I don't have as much of a luxury in regards to reading the entire manuscript before I start. I typically read notes that the author sends me. I talk to the author very often, and I ask any relevant questions, but I don't get the chance to really dive into it. With a longer book, that does allow me more time, even in the booth, to really get a feel for the character, get a feel for their mindset and how they'd sound. So yeah, it's really nice creatively. But again, it's like only 24 hours in a day, 8 of which are sleeping.
I know we talked about this also. I asked you that with when it comes to these characters in these books, do you spend most of your time? I mean, do you come up with the character's voice, how that character's going to sound, whether or not they have an accent, how you want to deal with them, or do you get a lot of that told to you by the authors or by the publishers or whatever?
The publishers typically don't get involved in the creative process in that regard. They leave that up to the author and the narrator. The publishers will insist upon the author to provide notes and say to the narrator, here's all the materials that you need, have at it. And then they will handle the technical side of production, the editing, the mastering, like the finished files, aside from the editing that I do myself. But the creative process of finding a character's voice, it is usually a 50-50 between the author suggesting what they'd like, what they were thinking, but then also understanding that it is now a multiple person creative process. There's a second person involved. It's not just how they were thinking of the character in their head, it's how the actor is going to be thinking of the character in their head, which will lead to a maybe different interpretation, maybe the same, who knows. But they usually provide me with, and I request, a couple of sentences describing the character, their placement in the story, any adjectives that describe them, any sort of metaphor used to describe them, and if they want an accent, to let me know right away what they were thinking, because then that is technically the hardest part. But I was thinking on that yesterday, when I was describing how to create a voice. I love very much when authors use adjective to describe the character's voice, because then I can use that to influence my own process. I remember seeing a documentary or behind the scenes thing of the Clone Wars TV show with D. Bradley Baker. And if you know the show, you know that he voices all of the clones and they all have the same voice. But what he does is he'll put in his scripts an adjective to describe each different character's voice and give it a slightly different feel. And I found with audiobooks that is immensely helpful to figure out the tone and have that be the driving force of how the character sounds. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'll typically do. I will go into the booth, find the descriptors, put it into my voice, work it out in the booth for about 5-10 minutes, and then just go ahead.
And that's got to be complicated by trying to figure out, especially with the fantasy stuff. We've got all these. I mean, it always kind of cracks me up that we've got all these different worlds, and yet they all have Scottish people in them for some reason.
Yeah, surprisingly, like it's crazy how many parallel worlds have Scottish dwarves. It was actually refreshing to me to see a book that I did for Podium that had Scandinavian dwarves. And I was working with Rebecca on that one. I called her up and I'm like, finally, I get to use my Skyrim voice. It's different now. So it was really fun to do that. And since then, we've kind of flipped a coin, or we're like, do we want to make the dwarves Scottish or Scandinavian? How are we feeling? So that's been really fun. But, I think that's just, it helps to bring people into fantasy. It's already a very different world than what we're expecting because, it's fantastical. So to have accents that sound similar to, the real world, I think it helps bring listeners in. But that does remind me, there was a book I did for James Haddock called Stonecutter Shadow, and it's a fantasy world. It's set in a world with magic and elemental mages and stuff like that. And the main character, I was working through accents, and James said, I would love it if he had sort of a Scottish accent or a more street tough accent. And so I sent him a clip with the Scottish. I did the entire book with a Scottish accent because it's first person. So it was a long one, but I think it worked out really well. But one of the top reviews is, I love the guy's performance, but his accent made me think he was a dwarf the entire time. And he wasn't a dwarf. He was just a man. He was a man with a Scottish accent.
Another thing we talked about, and this was an interesting one I thought was kind of funny again, the authors, especially in the fantasy world, when it comes to names, they're kind of, they're just making them up. I mean, they're just putting letters together and calling it a name. And so you've got to see all those words and try to figure out how to pronounce them. How does that process work for you?
Typically good, typically easy, usually, sometimes. When it helps that a lot of these fantastical names are rooted in something, and I'll ask them, it's like, oh, is this a Latin base, or is this like a different language base? Is this Esperanto, which sometimes it is. But then you get some that are very out there. The one that you were working through, I know I mentioned this yesterday, but the one from Blackstone by Sean Oswald, that fantasy book I worked on, the main world is called Iokusente. Or at least it was to me. I read it. It read very well like Iokusente. It's a lot of vowels, and it flowed off the tongue the easiest. So I did that. Now, Blackstone, they are wonderfully supportive of the narrator to get them everything that they need, even remotely need, to produce a book. So I got a list of pronunciations from them that was about like an inch or like an inch thick, if I was like holding it up, like a good inch or two thick of pronunciations. And they had that in there as Iokusente. And I submitted it, and apparently it wasn't exactly correct to what they had heard from Sean Oswald, the writer. And I get back the corrections for the book, and about half of them are Iokusente, super long, like sheet of corrections, and about maybe like 400 corrections, honestly, now that I was thinking, because I think I said 800 yesterday. I was like, that's way too much. That's hyperbolic. That's not exact. But it was about 400, I'd say, and about 200 of them were the name of this made up country that nobody else has ever said, nobody else would know if it was made up except for the three of us, Blackstone, myself, and Sean. So I called Sean and said, hey, I said it like this. Is this okay? He's like, oh yeah, it's fine. And I called Blackstone. I'm like, hey, Sean said it's okay. Can we just leave the fantasy name pronunciations out and just focus on like if I actually missed an Oxford dictionary word or I mispronounced a person's name or I said the wrong word? And they're like, oh yeah, that's no problem. So they're all understanding because they know it's kind of silly, what we do. It's like just it's a grand story, it's a dramatic story, but when you take a step back, it's I'm saying funny words into a mic in my closet. So that self-awareness sort of helps with the mispronunciation aspect of fantasy. So I just take my best stab at it and I just go.
Nice. Yes. And I noticed, and we're talking, of course, a lot about the fantasy stuff that you've done and that kind of, and the science fiction stuff you've done. And also, we brought this up yesterday. That a lot of times it seems like if you're following audiobooks and stuff like that, you can get down to following the narrator, and a lot of times the narrator seems to have a genre that they stick to, almost like they call it in Hollywood, like typecasting, where they seem to be kind of type narrated into a certain area of books for the most part.
Yes.
Yeah. So do you worry about that, or do you enjoy doing what you do? And do you worry about getting I don't know, locked into the same thing, getting bored of it?
So that's interesting. So I'm going to change my answer from what I said yesterday a bit, because I actually on the RC Brays podcast, we talked about that a bit because we were all in romance fantasy and very much in it. And I kind of described it as a genre akin to an IKEA in that once you get into it, you kind of get lost in it and it's kind of hard to find your way out. In a good way, because it's just like the authors see your success in the genre. They want to replicate it again and again. So they just keep giving you work. And it did bother me a bit at first, like, oh, I don't want to just be doing this. But I think that if the drive is there and the, professional passion is there to actively chase other genres, actively go out of your way to find other work, you can find other work. You just need to be focused on, hey, I'd like to do multiple things. And apologies if you hear a siren. There's an ambulance right by my window. Oh, man. That's one difficulty of recording in a city and living near a hospital. I have to pause frequently for ambulances and fire trucks and all that. But back to the topic at hand, I'd say you can get stuck in a genre, but only if you choose to get stuck in a genre. If you're comfortable, if you become a bit more complacent, like, hey, this is steady work, it's a safety net, that's great. And that's fine. That's totally fine. But if you want to do other things, it's going to take a bit to, find some other stuff. But if you've established yourself as a professional, as someone who can do this job and who does well in the job itself, then you shouldn't have that much trouble getting other work.
Now, you work with a large variety of authors from what I've seen so far. I've also noticed there's some authors who specifically like to work with just one narrator. One of the narrators I brought up that's one of my favorites, Tim Gerard Reynolds. I know Michael J. Sullivan writes a lot of books that I really enjoy, but he has all of his books are narrated specifically by Tim Gerard Reynolds. And so does that kind of relationship matter to you? Do you have that a lot with the authors where you really like working on all of their projects?
Actually, yeah, I've been very fortunate in that I've only had a handful of clients that we decided to part ways with, amicably and just didn't gel with. But that was the exception, not the norm. The norm is that I have a fantastic relationship with everyone that I work with. A lot of them are on my Christmas cards list. And we'll just shoot the breeze over Facebook or text. And if there's a new release coming out, I see it and I'm just like, hey, do you want me to do this? I'd like to audition for it. I still always say I'd like to audition for it because I never want to become one of those performers who automatically assumes I have a job, because then I feel like that's doing a disservice to the author and assuming that just because we're friends and we've worked in the past means that they'll work with me every single time, which doesn't have to be the case. So I would always like to audition and make sure that I'm the proper fit for the project. But then again, I think like every time I've asked that, they've just been like, you don't have to audition, just do it. So I guess I don't have to, but it's nice, just to put that forward. And in regards to single narration versus partner narration, part of that is financial, just because you're paying for two different people, but also it just, if the book just, requires it. There are some books I've worked on with authors where they've said, this is a solo story. There should be one voice. This should be one person telling the story. And other ones where they've said, actually, I think it needs that back and forth. The way it's written, it's a lot of this back and forth dialogue. It's a lot of this back and forth conversational stuff. It needs another point of view. Example, the Infinita audiobooks I worked on with Christopher Hopper and Rebecca Woods, he specifically said this was written for audio. This was written for two people. This was written to have your chemistry. So please, if you don't mind. And we were like, absolutely, this is an amazing book. So yes, thank you. So it's all subjective. It all depends. But yes, I have a good relationship with them.
I have just on a separate thought, just on my own thoughts on that kind of point. I have again, it's Stormlight Chronicles by Brandon Sanderson. He does two narrators in that, a female and a male, but they actually do it in an interesting format where the male will narrate the entire section or chapter, doing the males and the female voices, and then the female will do the same. It's just a matter of whose perspective it's from. It's from the male primary character's perspective or the female primary character's perspective as to which narrator reads the section.
And it is an interesting style, because partner narration, I agree that it's on the rise. It's on the up and up. It's definitely becoming more and more of a reoccurring, consistent thing in audiobooks. But that sort of flip-flop on perspective, that is also still rare, even within partner narration. So I think that artistically, there's actually some cool, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a better word than things there, because it feels like such a simple word, but it's just a lot of cool stuff in that style. Like, it's about how they hear a person's voice, and they're just sort of like telling their perspective of how a person sounds, rather than an objective character voice coming in and saying those lines. So it's a cool perspective. It's a cool take on the partner narration style. I don't do it, but I think it's cool.
Well, yeah, I'll just ask one more question, and we'll open it up, see if anybody else has got anything they want to ask. But I mentioned this yesterday, so I'll just bring it up again. I have, like I said, followed narrators at times. I mean, at times I've got a really long wish list on Audible right now, so it's not the current situation, but I have at times got to the end of a book and said, well, I need another book. And I've looked at, well, who was the narrator on this book? Okay, let me see what else they've done. And, maybe there'll be something in there I like. And so I've gone that way. So I have my favorite narrators. I mentioned them yesterday, Tim Gerard Reynolds, Travis Baldry, one, some of those types of guys. Who do you particularly like if you're listening to it, or do you, try to maybe mimic, or not mimic, but, kind of work towards being like, kind of thing, your role models in this voice acting?
I have a few. One, the top is the Lord R.C. Bray.
R.C. Bray.
He is one of my. He's a delight to talk to too. So talking with him yesterday was like a dream come true. Him and Tess from the female perspective, because she does a lot of solo narration and does a lot of male and female characterization, and so to hear her shift back and forth, it's inspired for me. And in regards to just the male narration, R.C. Bray's on there, Luke Daniels, Nick Padell. I'm a massive fan of Travis Baldry. I think he just understands storytelling, especially in fantasy, so well. And There was one I forgot. Adam Gold. He does a lot of fantasy as well, and it's just the cadence and the accent work that he does that just, I don't know, it does something for me. I just love it. It's really great. But those are some of my favorites, and obviously, Scott Brick for the classic, like OG, like S tier narration, is definitely up there.
All right. Well, thank you again very much. And I just wanted to, ask you guys out there now who have been listening and stuff like that. Do you have any questions for Daniel? Have any of you got any questions about audiobooks in general? I know that I did cover this yesterday, so I'll just briefly go into all of that. The main services that I know of out there for audiobooks on the iPhone are the NLS Bard, which is free to disabled people with learning and visual disabilities, and you can listen to audiobooks on that. Oftentimes, those have a mixture of volunteer readers and professional recordings, and they are finding more and more professional recordings in there. So you will come across them, but sometimes they might be a little bit delayed in their release to the NLS Bard. There's also Hoopla, which uses your local library, and it will have a lot of audiobooks as well as other types of ebooks and movies that you can get from that. Hoopla is another app you can get, and it requires a library card at your local library, and then you can download books from there. And then there's Audible, which I think I said yesterday. I tried to look that up. I think it's 278 titles that I'm currently on as far as how many downloaded books I've done from Audible. And I think that's probably even light. I'm just not sure that that's even counting them all. But that's on Audible. Audible is a Amazon company. They are a paid subscription site. So you can subscribe to them. You can buy books just straight from them. However, it cost-wise is almost ineffective to not become a member. The membership, I think on standard basic membership, runs around $14.95 a month. That usually includes one credit. It does include one credit and for one per month. And then there's also memberships at the 2 credit per month level, and then the annual memberships of either 12 or 24 annual credits per year. And they range at different prices, and it kind of averages out to a different price basically per book, because the one credit essentially means one book, regardless of the price of the book. I've never seen one where, whether it was a $60 book or a $9 book or a $4 book, where the price differed. It's always just one credit. So that's one of the things that I always think about when I'm looking through there, is I basically figure out a credit's worth about $10 to $12. And so if the book's less than that, I'll just buy the book versus using credit on it when I'm going through the Audible catalog and looking for things. So those are a lot of the services that you can get books from. If you haven't gotten into audiobooks yet, I really highly recommend them. I said this yesterday. To me, and I think some of my other constituents would agree with me, audiobooks to us are kind of like our movies, and narrators and authors are like our directors and lead actors. They can be a lot of things for our entertainment. My wife likes to sit and watch TV shows, and I listen to books while she's doing that. That's my nighttime entertainment. So again, does anybody else have any comments or anything they'd like to share?
Okay, Nick, it's Sam. I'm holding back. It just drives me crazy.
Go for it.
Okay. So, I've had a million questions come up throughout this whole thing, and as they came up, fortunately, you asked the questions and they were answered.
Wonderful.
But I still have more.
Oh, good.
Okay. But one of the things, Nick and Daniel, is that there is one other service that I know of called librofm, as in the word book in Spanish. And it supports independent bookstores. So if you go online and buy your Audible books through there, the money actually goes to an independent bookstore. Their website isn't the most accessible in the world, but it's you can kind of make it work. And every time I get an email from them that says graphic, or unlabeled, I send them another email that reminds them that their biggest constituents are often people who are print disabled or who can't see, and you need to make this accessible. And then they write me back and they say, okay, thank you very much, and we're going to fix that for you. Now, the other problem with them is that, for me, this is the problem. So their books are all about $15 as well. But I have over 1,000 books in my Audible library. So I am not spending $15 for a book. It ain't happening. So, and I've told them that. So you come up with a tool for me to support independent bookstores, and I'm all for it, but they don't have one yet. But if you're only buying one a month, it's the same as Audible. You're good to go. Okay, now that's my bandstand. Now let's come back to my questions. Daniel, it seems to me that the big difference that I see between theater and Audible books is that it's missing one key person. And am I correct? There's no director.
Typically, from the stuff I've done, no. I sometimes have producers, but they are mostly behind the scenes felicitation, making sure everybody gets their materials, making sure everything meets their deadlines, keeping everything tip top clock shape, just all like clockwork. Yeah. But pretty much every book I've done has been my direction, and that is an astute observation. It's a very individual artistic experience a lot of these times. Even when there's the collaboration with a partner and with the author and all of that, it's still just me in my booth, or just Rebecca in her booth, or Jessica, and what have you. And it's such a it's sometimes such a daunting thing to do, because there are days when I listen to this and just think, oh, I hope somebody thought this was good. It's so missing that feedback element, that other person's input, which I really do miss about theater. I miss the guidance of direction. I miss the helping hand of other people telling me, well, maybe if you try it like this. But typically, I usually don't mind as much when I talk to the authors afterwards and they give it a listen and they're like, oh, this is perfect. This is exactly what I want. So I'm like, okay, maybe I'm just being, overly sensitive actor and just like, oh, I crave input. But most often than not, yeah, it's a little daunting, but it works.
And maybe I misspoke, because it's really two pieces missing, because you don't have an audience.
Well, so that's
you don't get that feedback either.
I do, but I just don't have them at the moment, which I miss so much. But I've actually thought about. I talked to I believe it was Harmon Cooper, another big fantasy guy, and he talked about some authors and narrators that he's worked with. The narrators will then live stream their recordings, their recording sessions, and even though I crave an audience, I couldn't do that. I find that with this specific job, even though I miss it, it just wouldn't work for the creative process. It's like I need them to see the finished product and they can just give me their reviews afterwards. It's very much like film in that sense, where it is so intimate. It is just, but instead of a person and a camera, it's a person and a microphone. And if other people are reacting to it in the moment, it will just gum up the gears, as it were. Theater, you need it. Audiobooks, you need it after.
That was an interesting point too. They have the on the reviews on Audible, they have the overall, and they have performance and story. Yes. When you're rating the book. Mm-hmm. So do you take a look at that and take that performance to mean
every day.
That's what, yeah. Okay.
Every day. There are I used to look just because I was like, oh, do people like me? Now I'm looking like, what's the worst review and what do they say and why, for fun? Because I think it's so entertaining, some of them, because most of them are so nice. Most of them are wonderfully well written, very respectful. Then you get the trolls, and the trolls are fun in a different way. I've been called Shatner-esque by some, and I wear it as a badge of pride, because at least Shatner had a career for 70 years. So I think that was really a really fun, stylistic thing that I've actually leaned into for some of my for some of my books if it calls for it. But yeah, I love to read the reviews and see what people think, because there is also some other uh, helpful feedback within there, and to even just be told that you're consistently doing a good job is still feedback, and it's wonderfully appreciated.
Now, going back to the issue of no director,
Mhm.
does that change your relationship with the script or the text, and the author versus or the screenwriter versus the playwright?
This is a deep way to spend my Wednesday afternoon. I like it.
I was an English
good
major.
questions. That explains it. It does give me more respect for the text, I find. Even the stuff that I haven't enjoyed all the way through, and there have been those, because there is with anything, and when you do enough of anything, you're going to have your favorites and the ones that you were like, not so much. But every script I go through, I find the one good thing, and I carry that through me through the entire project, and I just treat it with the utmost respect and try to give it the honors that it deserves, or even if I don't like it as much honor as the one good thing deserves. And I will say it has really improved my cold reading, and I have a massive respect for cold readers, which is to say that people who read something right as they get it. You don't have as much prep time. You're reading it and reacting to it as it happens. But I think that works with audiobooks, at least for me as a performer. It's worked with my style because it allows even me as a person, and then as an actor, to engross myself in the universe more actively, because it's happening right then for the first time to me in the booth. And if there's a mess up, or if the take couldn't be as good as it could have been, I obviously will go back and redo it again. But for the most part, I like to have the text affect me for the first time as I'm doing it in the recording session. And it's just made me respect the fact that some of these authors can churn out like 50 of these in a month. And I'm like, my goodness. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. I rambled a bit. Oh, good.
No. And so when
I have a question about that. Are you a method actor? Are you considered a method actor then? Would you say that you were a method actor then? Or that's a good question. That's a good question. I was talking about this with a buddy of mine out in LA, because we talk about acting styles all the time. He's a big film guy. We're actually working on a short film together that features voice acting. But with audio work, I'd say that method isn't as much of a positive styling. With film, with theater, things that are more requiring of other people and other people's energy, I think method provides an excellent way of immersing yourself into the given circumstances, into those different worlds. And it's also more tactile. It's more, there's usually more props, there's settings, there's costumes. With audio, it's all in the imagination. So which is, that's kind of what method needs, is a lot of imagination. But there's nothing other than the man or the woman, the person. I was going for alliteration with the man and the mic, but the person and the microphone. And it just doesn't work. I have tried it for some things to try and get into like more of a character's mindset. There was one book I did early on where the character has a bit of a drinking problem, and I did take a swig of a drink, but I'm like, this is not good. This is not a good technique. But it's just a lot more. I'd say it's just the method is more imaginative. It's more in the head. So I hope that answers that question as well. It's very.
So you don't wear like costumes when you're doing your readings?
I mean, yeah, but that's just for me. No, I actually typically most of my days are if I'm feeling relaxed, I'll just wear like sweats and a bathrobe, and it's just very, very relaxed, whatever's comfortable. Because I'm standing for 6 hours at a time some days, and I just whatever is the easiest to get comfortable with. But then I just throw myself into the book. I put the blinders on. I just focus on the universe that's there, and hopefully something good comes out of it.
Wow.
Do you
Daniel,
consider,
this is Brand. Oh, I'm sorry.
when you're doing that, no, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. You can ask your
ahead.
question.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, most actors have like a portfolio where they have headshots and they send them out. How do you get your voice to, like for your audition? Is it like you send samples of your voice out, your different accents and what you're capable of out to different, I guess, sources to audition? How does that work for you?
That's a great question. And for those of you who are looking to maybe get into this yourself, here are some tips and tricks of the business. So how it usually works is I will create a demo reel. They're usually about a minute to a minute and a half long, featuring samples of my voice in various different characters that I've produced, or characters that I might have played through different projects, or even original stuff that I wrote to show off the kinds of characters that I can do. I will edit that together, master it, and then that is on my website. That is also on ACX, which is the auditioning site for audiobooks. And I also gave those to my voiceover agent, for whom I submit a lot of commercials and cartoons and things like that that aren't audiobooks, because I can get that on my own. A reel also is very specific for certain things. Like there are character reels, which are different from commercial reels, which can be different from a sizzle reel, which is a lot of promos and things like that. So it's a lot of different samplings compiled together to basically show all the stuff you can do within a certain type of job that is then on your own social medias, on your own sites, and that you send out for jobs. Or if they want a specific side for an audition, they'll send you something back, and then you send in your take on the text that they gave you.
Okay. And so what would you recommend for someone that's looking to get into doing what you do?
First thing I would try to suggest is find someone that you enjoy listening to, someone's sound that you find either is similar to your own voice or a voice that you can easily get into. Find some of the work that they've done, give it a listen, and then start to put your own spin on their style, on their text that they've done. Because first and foremost, if you're not doing something you enjoy, if it's not something you're having fun with, then, you know, you're not going to want to do it, even professionally. So I would say start with that, and then move into different ways of manipulating your sound, trying different opposites of how you normally sound. Like for me, a big thing, because I'm very much a baritone, I like to practice higher pitch voices for characters, and I'll just flip to up here and see if I can do stuff here and stuff like that. And just like go back and forth and just experiment with different sounds for my voice. And then after all that, I'd also take classes. I've taken some wonderful voiceover classes that usually, you know, local theaters can provide, Backstage provides. Any place where you can study acting usually offers courses in voice acting, who could tell you a lot more than I can tell you right now. But that is something to do, and then practice and practice and practice, and just work on honing your sound on decent equipment. You don't need the absolute professional best right away, but on decent stuff, you know, practice on a snowball mic, practice on a USB mic. And then when you feel like you have a handle on how you sound and how you can do that work and what you're good at, then you start compiling your samples together, and you start to start searching for different projects to do.
Wow, that was great. I don't think we had that on there yesterday, so we're definitely going to have Randy put up the recording for this one too.
Yeah,
that's good stuff. We did record and post on YouTube. I will send you that link, Daniel, and I'll send you anything from this one too. Our yesterday's performances for our yesterday's seminar, and then we are recording again today. So I'm sure.
Daniel, I I have a question. Do you have any authors that are like on your wish list of
Oh
titles that you would
man,
love to read?
that I'd love to read. I mean, Sanderson, we joke, but I would gladly, wholeheartedly jump on anything that he pens. But I also would love, I don't know if it's going to happen because I never know when he'll finish it. But if George R. R. Martin ever decides to do a multicast production of any of his books, I would be there. Oh, that's another voice I love. Simon Vance. Oh my gosh.
Oh, yes.
Amazing. And Rachel Treese,
Another
may he
amazing
rest in
one.
peace. Fantastic narrators who understand the fantastical world that this world is. But I love that. And yeah, I'd say that it's just a lot of the authors that I work with, I really enjoy their stuff. I just want them to keep putting out the same consistently good work, or better, because everybody can do better. I can do better. Work that they've been doing. I'm kind of enjoying right now. I'm working with some of my favorites, so I'm kind of lucky in that way. But if I could, I'd like to work with the heaviest hitter in fantasy that I think is out there today.
Cool. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
I got a question. Is it possible you read a paragraph right now of your best voice?
Of my best voice? Sure. Let me find something that I really I know what I can do. There's a book. It's from it's coming out in the next month or two. I may have mentioned it earlier in the talk, but it's called First Fist. It's a fantasy book by T.J. Reynolds, and I'm just trying to find the script. I sent it. Here it is. Righty. That's not it. Sorry, it's in parts. It is in parts. Where are you? Okay. My apologies. I thought I had this on hand. I do have it. It's just off to the side. If you'll give me 1 second, I'll go get it.
Good question. I was dying to hear it too.
We get a command performance.
Yeah.
Right. I've returned.
Okay.
Yeah.
We were talking about you.
Oh, joy. Hopefully good things. All good things. All good things. All right. Here we go. So this is like I'll read the first or so page of chapter 1.
Okay.
Chapter 1. The limitations of parchment. A soldier's greatest burden is not the press and clamor of battle. It is the loss of the life that could have been. Tanlin Garenhall, second son of Third Lord Joff Farinall. Lucas sat in a wide circle of soldiers, all breathing in and out, eyes closed, working through a final cycle of Andea's breath together. Closing his mouth, Luca drew in another sharp breath. Lungs full, he exhaled through his mouth, releasing his wind slowly. As always, he imagined invisible threads of mana absorbing into his body, strengthening it with the resilience of stone. The red and gray cloaks his fellows wore matched perfectly. Their faces, though, and the color of their hair differed greatly. It wasn't their ancestry that bound them. It was their place in the Stonebringer clan. Yeah, that's I just really like that
That's
first.
awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Very
Sure.
great.
It'll sound even better when it's on my better mic, and I'm not, I'm not running back from getting my phone. I was just like, okay, let's do this.
I wouldn't call that Shatner-esque at all. I'd call that very reminiscent of Brick. I hear, yeah.
Woo!
You could definitely you're definitely up there with Scott Brick. I could listen to anything.
Amazing. That is a great compliment.
You want to read Andy Weir's next book?
Ooh, that would be great. I mean, I think
He's
Ray
a
Porter's
friend.
got that there. Is he?
Yeah.
Oh,
I was very bummed when they took R.C. Bray's version of The Martian down and put up Will Wheaton's. Although I love Will Wheaton, I was like, no, but RC Braid did such a fantastic job.
He did. He really did.
Yes, he did.
It's one of the best lost audiobooks out there. But if
So
he
if
is
you
having
have
auditions,
an RC Bray Martian, then keep it.
But if
Oh, yeah.
he is having auditions, I would gladly. I only was thinking of
Oh.
fantasy at that mindset. I was like, oh, that's untouchable. He's got Ray Porter. Ray Porter's a god.
Ray Porter is great, but wow. Okay. Yeah.
If you got an in, maybe make a suggestion. I can send him some reels.
I
work with
can.
Podium. He knows Podium. We work together. It's great.
Awesome. Well, Daniel, we really appreciate you coming on and joining us. I mean, like I said, this is for a lot of us. This is our main form of entertainment. So it's very exciting. And like I said,
may
folks,
I ask
Daniel,
real quick if the narrator,
go ahead.
what the narrator website was again that you said?
Sure. acx.com. That'll also give you a lot of just acx.com. It gives you a lot of info on there. It'll teach you how to set it up. It's got auditions. It's got samples of different narrators to listen to see, what you should do, maybe what you shouldn't do, things like that. It's a wonderful source of information, and it's probably the most consistent site for audiobooks specifically in regards to work and resources. I still have mine. I haven't auditioned in months, but I still check it every day.
Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Sure.
Thank you. Very well done.
Thank you so much. Oh
Thank
my
you.
gosh.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you very much.
So as a last thing, guys, Daniel did comb through some of his authors and publishers and get us a lot of Audible codes for free books. So if I'm going to work on putting together a list that has some of the publishers' descriptions on there for you, along with that kind of information. And then if you guys want to email me or your instructors about it, we'll talk with Paul and figure out how we can distribute those. But we did get a number of Audible codes. So if you guys are interested in it, listening to Daniel narrate a book, let us know. And thank you again very much, Daniel. And I will send you copies of these or the links to the YouTube postings of these meetings.
Amazing.
Fantastic.
And thank you all so much for having me on. It's an absolute blast, and gladly we'll do it anytime you ask. I hope you guys like science fiction and fantasy, because that's what a lot of the codes are. So there you go. Thank you for the continued listening and support. Thank you so much.
What was the title that had soul in the name?
That's Soul Stealer.
Soul Stealer? Okay.
Yeah. And there's a lot of shouting in that one. So be prepared.
Oh, good. I like it.
Oh, good. Yay.
I like that.
Yeah.
Great.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all again so much.